What we've got here going on is a man whose voice is recognized around the world, and so is his face. He's been a regular on TV shows like Hollywood Squares and Dave's World, and currently he's announcing for the late-night TV variety and talk show, Craig Ferguson. Now, in radio, he's hosted the syndicated countdown show American Top 40, among other things, and he's had a great career, and it's still going well. He's Shadoe Stevens. And hi, Shadoe. Thanks so much for coming in.
Please, sit down. Please. Oh, that's enough. That's enough. Oh, thank you. Oh, you're too much. Oh, this is fun.
All right. All right, Shadoe. I want to start off with a basic question. How in the world did Shadoe come about? How'd you get that name?
It was given to me by God at high noon in Alamogordo, New Mexico, right outside the atomic testing range in 1969. I was traveling there. I was an innocent bystander. Suddenly, a voice appeared unto me saying, "Thou wilt be as Shadoe with an E, go ye out among men," or words to that effect. And it was a very low voice. I had to take it seriously and had no choice. I was humiliated by it, honestly, and tried to change it again and again and again. But I wasn't that lucky. I couldn't get away from it, and so I became it.
Shadoe. You know, your start came, you're originally from the state of North Dakota, and you started actually...
North Dakota.
Hey, I grew up 2 states down from you in Nebraska.
Oh,
I grew
you're
up in Omaha.
kidding me.
And my dad...
Cripes.
Oh, yes, and my dad grew up on a farm in Minnesota, the neighboring state to North Dakota.
Creepers.
All these upper Midwest people here. Anyway, your start in radio came at age 10 in North Dakota in your house. You had a little radio station going on there, didn't you?
I built a little radio station in my house. My uncle was in radio and heard that I was taken away by the mystery of radio. What we did is my dad had a tape recorder, and we would make tapes of, like the Flying Saucer, where you'd tell a little story and then put in a little piece of song, and he thought that was just charming. So he sent me a radio kit that would allow you to broadcast into another room. And what happened was I souped it up. I was, even at that time I had no attention span, and then tried to keep going. I put up a 100-foot antenna so that I could broadcast a mile in every direction. And we would put on a long play album and then go out and drive to see how far we could hear the radio station. So it was about a mile and a half.
Oh, that's cool. And you're 10 years old, and you're the talk of the neighborhood. Now, after that, you go on to college. I know you went down to college in Arizona, and then you moved on to big-time radio in Boston. Describe that situation.
Well, it was in Boston that I first became Shadoe, and it was, a big turning point in my life. I became quite successful there. We had actually like 33% of the audience, 12 and over, were listening to WRKO.
Oh, yeah. And that was
on the heat of that success, I was brought out to Los Angeles to the #1 radio station in the world.
KHJ.
How about that? And I was the full-time relief announcer who was supposed to get the next full-time gig. I was being seasoned to be among the stars, and that isn't exactly what happened. What is interesting, because during that time I was hired. I started doing television, and I was the sidekick announcer for the Steve Allen show. And so there I was on national television. It wasn't like Ryan Seacrest today, where he's on television and it's really good for radio. No. In fact, what they said was, "Well, we don't know if you're serious about radio. We think that you should be doing one or the other. Maybe that's your calling, television." And so they wouldn't promote me, so I quit. And I was hired by KRLA.
Sure.
And when
you worked with Johnny Hayes there, didn't you?
I worked with Johnny Hayes for a long time. He was a great guy. And they, in a short time later, a few months later, they made me program director, and we started to make history. And
you also created some great things in radio in L.A. during the 1970s as a program director, developing alternative formats and that sort of thing.
Well, on the success of KRLA, I was hired to go to this little upstart station, K-Rock. And K-Rock was a little AM station at the time, but I went in there with the idea that they were going to be on FM, and that's exactly what happened. They got their FM signal and made me program director, so I signed the station on the air and created the format, which was, at the time, really revolutionary, and I had to really fight for it, frankly.
Now, was Ken Roberts owning K-Rock at that time?
No, Ken Roberts was an unwilling participant brought in by a guy named Gary Bucosta, who is a very charismatic entrepreneurial type guy who had brought in 13 partners to create the station and got in trouble. And Ken Roberts was a friend of his who managed Sly Stone and Frankie Valli, and he had money and cash flow. So he paid the bills, basically. Not much of the bills. He paid the electrical bill and the phone bill, so the station would be allowed to stay on the air. And they went out and tried to find investors, and when they didn't, and our checks began to bounce, and all of us were going bankrupt, I quit one day, and the entire staff quit.
And this was at K-Rock or KRLA?
That was K-Rock.
K-Rock, okay. And about what year would that have been?
That was 70, I think 74.
Okay. I would later actually work for Ken Roberts very, very briefly at 103.1 when Mars FM was brought on the air back in 1991. So I was, now, of course, you had the great radio. I know that you were on KHJ as a DJ and KRLA and everything, and you were a big-time DJ. Then, of course, here comes the Federated spots. You did those Federated commercials, and one thing that was so spectacular about that is the advertising appeared to work. The store went from about 14 stores because of this advertising to 78 stores. Wow.
Yeah, well, that came after I defiantly quit radio. I had been at K-Rock for a bunch of years and decided I couldn't take radio anymore. I decided to quit while I was ahead and went into television. And then they came along and I came up with this ad campaign for them that they gave me a shot at. And it worked so well. Their business went up 500% in a week.
How about that?
And it did. Over the next 5-6 years, it grew to be a big deal. And I did 1,100 television commercials.
How about that? Now, Federated, was that an electronics company?
Yeah, it was kind of like Best Buy.
Okay.
You know, it was a home electronics superstore.
Okay. And then later on here, we're jumping a little bit ahead here. You went to Hollywood Squares. John Davidson was the host, and Shadoe Stevens here was the announcer on that show. And that was in the late 80s, and that carried over beyond there, too.
Yeah, well, that came partially on the heat of all the success I had during doing Federated, and then I had a 3-picture deal with Dino De Laurentiis to do movies, and they hired me to do Hollywood Squares. I was going to be the announcer, but they would put me in a square to talk about all the other things I was doing, and then that took off, and then I became a regular and did that for the next few years. And on the heat of that, I got American Top 40.
Which we're going to be discussing here in just a second. One thing, getting back to the Hollywood Square situation here, I can remember a couple of girls that I liked a lot in the TV show I liked a lot. You remember the ABC TGIF show in the late 90s, or late 80s, I should say, Just the 10 of Us? Sure. I know you had Joanne Willette and Brooke Thies on there as celebrities on that Hollywood Square show one time I saw.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody who was anybody was on that show. It was a top 5 syndicated show in the country. It was a very, very big show.
Now, is that still running, or is anybody? No. Okay.
No, it went through another incarnation with Whoopi Goldberg, which I also was a part of, but only as a voice. And that went on for another 4 years, and now it's in a holding pattern.
Okay, all right. Who knows? Maybe we'll see you on there again. You know, getting to the American Top 40 thing now, you beat out like more than 1,000 different applicants, and you go through the audition process with American Top 40. How long did it take, and how many callbacks did you get before they announced Shadoe's the man? How many?
It's like everything in life is 10 times harder than you can ever imagine it would be. Things just, at least for me and for everybody I know, nothing ever came easy. And even that, it was, I auditioned and I got a callback. And I had auditioned a second time. Can you do it a different way? We kind of like that. Could you come back again? And then they wanted a different way. There were 4 or 5 auditions, and each one required a certain amount of preparation. Could you do it like the Casey style? Can you do it your own style? That's too far out. Can you come back and do it somewhere in the middle? Okay, can you put the best of all of those things together and do it one more time. And then they finally gave it to me, and then after they gave it to me, and there was a big to-do about it. And
we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Now, for those auditions, I mean, you were up against some top people. I know Pat Sajak supposedly auditioned,
right.
Alan Thicke and Donny Osmond, who later would fill in for you on AT40.
Right. Well, there were a lot of people, and it was a very big show, and had a long history, and it was quite a big deal. And it was growing immensely internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your reaction when you got it? Did you just pump the fist and say, "Oh wow"? Or what was your reaction when you landed the show in 1988?
No, I was thrilled. It was a big deal. You know, it was a major breakthrough in my life that allowed me to do. I always loved radio, and to be able to do television and radio at the same time was great. And there was a lot of negotiation going on for me to do my own show, which is exactly what happened on the heat of my success at Hollywood Squares and American Top 40. Then I was signed by Fred Silverman and CBS to do my own series, and that didn't take off, but it was a great experience. It was a short-lived series that was kind of like Lethal Weapon.
Oh, okay. We're going to talk about Dave's World. You, of course, were a star on that show. We're going to talk about continuing on with the AT40. Now, with the AT40, how much preparation did you actually have to do for the first show? Was it just simply come in and sit down and read the script? Did you have to study at home a little bit?
No, the first show was a nightmare. It was written for Casey Kasem, and my mouth would not do that. I could not make my mouth make that and make it sound right. So the first show took 16 or 17 hours to do a 4-hour show. I had knots in my neck as quickly rewriting and redesigning and trying to figure out what's going to work for me. And what we ended up doing was, barely acceptable. But, we figured it out as we went along. And like so many things in life, you jump in.
Was Don Bastani in on that first taping session that you did, or was it Tom Cuddy, or who were some of the American Top 40 staff members that were in on that first taping for you?
God, well, there was a whole staff that was in support, and Don Bastani was a key player, and Tom Cuddy was running the whole thing. So, everybody had a hand in it. Everybody was paranoid that I was going to be bad.
Oh, boy. And the first song you introduced on your first American Top 40 show, which was the week of August 13th in 1988, was Don't Worry, Be Happy, which won the Grammy Award for Bobby McFerrin. And your first number one on that first show, again, August 13th, 1988, was Roll With It by Steve Winwood. I can remember you describing that song as a smoldering bit of soul.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would say. A smoldering bit of soul.
Oh, I love it. Hey, and by the way, man, you beat me out. I got an audition for that American Top 40 show in 1988, and you beat my... Good. Oh, boy.
Well, I apologize.
Oh, it was a great thrill, though, to do it. Now, along the way, after you became host, some new features were, of course, introduced on American Top 40, like the American Top 40 Flashback, which would go back in time, a certain amount of years to the date, and you'd count down the top 5 songs on Billboard's chart, just a snippet of each song, like 5 years back or 10 years back.
Yeah. We tried to bring, a lot of new ideas into the show and make it a little more produced, a little more colorful, more contemporary. It had its day as a kind of 70s designed show, and we wanted to try and bring it up to the space age go-go, cutting edge 80s, 90s.
Exactly. And you brought in things like the AT40 Sneak Peek, which would actually preview a song that you would predict would make the countdown later on down the road.
Oh, we were so revolutionary.
Oh, there you go. And then you had the AT40 Music News. And, of course, you, Shadoe, did continue with the long-distance dedication feature, which, of course, Casey had been doing on the show for the previous decade. Now, and we were just talking about this before we started taping, you did one great dedication in particular that I remember, and that was right before Christmas in 1992. Your lovely daughter, Amber, she did a long-distance dedication. I think she was like 6 years old. I think Oh Christmas Tree was playing in the background as she read it, and it just was a real heartwarming, sweet-sounding dedication, and one of the things she said was, please feed all the people in the world.
Yeah, she's always was a sweet girl and still is. She's 20 now, and has her own career. She just shot a pilot for an ABC series, and she's signing a a deal to do a production deal in hopes of getting a record contract with three-time Grammy Award-winning producer-writer named Charlie Midnight.
Hey, how about that? That's so she's really up and coming as well. Now, another thing that started on the program after you became host that did not exist when Casey Kasem was hosting the show, and that was that you would actually use voice clips from artists telling their stories of songs and hits instead of having the announcer tell the story.
Yeah, well, again, it was, to make it a little more interesting and contemporary. We were trying to make it a little more colorful and a more exciting show.
Oh, yeah, very good. Now, Shadoe, about 3.5 years into the show, you became host August of 1988. 3.5 years into the show, Billboard did some chart changing and everything, and then you guys changed charts. You had the traditional Hot 100 survey going there, and then you had to go to another Billboard chart. Explain that.
I don't know. Everything was in a state of flux and transition, and they were looking for different directions and how to accommodate a wider potential of radio stations around the world, especially in the U.S. There was things were kind of shifting in the way radio was being done in the 90s, and there were everything was. It wasn't enough to have station that would play R&B and rock and hip hop and pop all at the same time. Now we had to have a version for the adult contemporary audience, and we had to have the pop audience, and we had to have the kinder, gentler audience, and they were looking for different ways to do different shows that would say the same thing, but not play those
rap and hard rock stuff.
Yeah, the rap and the hard rock. And
now, here you are applying for a show that you were, of course, very happy to get, American Top 40, and you got it and everything, and you just came in, you were being you and happy about it, being Shadoe and everything. Yet, the criticism of you, and maybe it didn't have as much to do with you as maybe the choice that people were used to hearing Casey, the criticism grew and grew for years. And take as much time as you'd like on this. Like to hear your story on that, if I could.
No, there isn't that much to talk about. There's a lot of fear in big business. In all corporations, people are afraid for their jobs. They're afraid of making the wrong decision. They're afraid of. That's why so few things happen. It's easier to say no than it is to say yes. And then as soon as you say yes, then you're on the line. And if that yes doesn't work, then you might lose your job. So everybody is like double-checking and backtracking and looking over their shoulder. And when you're the key figure, like I was, there was a lot of, you should do this and you shouldn't do that, and what if you do that? And at the same time, they weren't supporting it in promotion. They weren't allowing us to do it. I brought things to them that would have given them free trips to Tokyo, and you can't do that, or they wouldn't act on it, and they wouldn't play in the same field as their competition was playing in. So much to their surprise, all of this negative thinking added up, and they ended up being very critical and paranoid all the time.
Wow.
In the meantime, it was growing exponentially. It grew, we were on in 120 countries to an estimated billion people a week around the world. And all they had to do was to keep doing it. But unfortunately, what happened was somebody saw it as a political move where they could discontinue the show and distribute another show. In this case, it was Rick Dees. So
which we'll talk about here in just a minute.
Now, able to do that.
One of the things that we were discussing, you talked about before, was taking away your freedom. Now, I know that they were editing your pauses out on American Top 40, taking away your freedom and not letting Shadoe do what he wanted to do. And then they were, one thing that I heard also was that they were trying to make another Casey Kasem out of you, and you're just not Casey.
Well, I couldn't possibly be Casey. Casey's a unique entity unto himself. I have a much more elastic brain, and I like wordplay and creative production and a lot of things that we tried to bring into the mix. And in some cases it worked, in some cases it didn't. But everybody was trying their best, you know, that's all.
Sure.
Everybody was just trying to do the best job they could.
Absolutely, and including you. And I want to say that I listened to you for 6 years, and I loved listening to you, that's for sure.
What they did is they discontinued the show because they wanted to get out from under the responsibility of paying the overhead, and they wanted at the same time to be able to utilize the network that they'd created so they could distribute this new show. And so they made a simultaneous announcement. They announced that they were discontinuing American Top 40 because they didn't know whether they could keep it up for the future. So they would kind of retire it and at the same time make a big announcement that they were going to distribute Rick Dees. And that's exactly what happened.
Now, in January of 1995, the show did end completely. You taped the last show January 1995, and it was kind of an emotional time there. And I remember listening to that show, and you were saying during it, the number one song was Boyz II Men's "On Bended Knee." And you had said of the how many ever number one records in the history of American Top 40, this one is the last. And then you said, well, folks, it was emotional kind of listening to that.
Well, it was a colorful age, an interesting transition. And what happened was really amusing because in their depth and wisdom of taking the show off the air, and that it maybe might not work in the future, they didn't do anything with it for 2 years. All the money they'd paid for, the millions that they'd paid for this property, all reverted to Casey Kasem.
Absolutely.
Because he didn't do anything. And he just went out and made another $5 million deal, and it went right on the air and about 400 stations all over the country.
Now, this was in March of 1998. American Top 40 does return with Casey Kasem as the host, and it does take off again. This time they're using the radio and records chart. They're not using Billboard. Billboard charts I don't think have been used on national countdown shows in many, many years, probably since 1991.